born in Berlin, Germany, and in March 1925.
So March 1925 in Germany at the time, politically, was a time of some turmoil. World War I had ended, and
Yeah.
was your dad active in the politics of the area?
Yeah, because he was a socialist.
Socialist?
Yeah. So,
And over time, did he explain what drew him to socialism and a certain belief? No? Did he ever talk about it?
no,
No.
no. Yeah, I know he owned a tobacco wholesale business.
Mhm.
And I guess he went to meetings, but see, I went to an orphanage at the age of 6, and I haven't been home since,
Okay.
except for 1 year.
Okay.
So,
And just again, I know I read about it, but for the camera, the reason you went into the orphanage at age 6 was why?
because my mother died when I was 6,
Okay.
and he was all alone, and he asked my mother's brothers, will you periodically take care of my son, you know, when we are busy? And they told him we can't because he's Jewish. I come from a mixed marriage. So,
Your mother was Jewish?
no, my father.
Father was
Yeah.
Jewish?
And as you probably know, and that's a problem I have, that nobody understands it. In our religion, your mother's religion is automatic. So technically, under normal circumstances, I would have been Protestant. But my parents decided both against it. So all my life, I was born in a Jewish hospital. I had a circumcision, and then I went to a Jewish orphanage, to a Jewish school, and
laws, you would have been Jewish anyways, right?
yeah, but only half. As in the beginning,
Yeah,
it didn't last very long.
yeah. Right.
So, as you were growing up and you're an active boy, was it at the orphanage? It was a Jewish orphanage. Did you have much interaction with the Protestant German?
No. Except for 6 years, we went to a joint school, like you have here, public schools. But after the 6th year, around 1938, so Hitler decided take all the Jewish kids out of public schools and put them into a Jewish school. And we were no longer permitted to commingle. So our lives were basically based on the Jewish community.
What were they teaching you in school? So again, now you're born in 1925. As you're in school, was the doctrine of Nazism, was that part of the school curriculum?
Absolutely. Well, as soon as Hitler became popular. So we definitely had our religious meetings, and the Jews were always put into the back corner of the classroom. And but there was no commingling, and until Hitler decided that the kids had to get. I graduated grade school after 6 years and finished my 2 years in a Jewish school.
Okay. And the Jewish school was, I'm just trying to think, given the pervasiveness of anti-Semitism, did you feel it in the school? Because you were pretty, I mean, it was just Jewish.
Oh yeah, no. The kids were finally indoctrinated to hate Jews and not to associate with them. Or if they did associate with us, they were punished.
Okay.
And
How did you feel about that? I mean, here you're kind of isolated in your German society.
Absolutely. And once we went to the Jewish schools, on many days we came out of classes, at 2 o'clock, 2:30, whatever, and we had 2 rows of Hitler Youth standing there. They took off their buckled belts with a supervisor and a policeman, and with the buckle. They whipped us coming out of school until we ran fast enough to disappear. And then your reaction is, where was the policeman, right? There were no cell phones that I could call. And so the policeman was standing by that we would not defend ourselves against the Nazi kids that were beating us up.
So this time period would have been the mid-1930s, that you would have been subject to that.
Well, wait a minute, I started 6 years, would have been 1931, I started school. So it'd be in the 1931-33 period.
At what point did somebody who was an adult came up and said, maybe we should leave the area, we should leave Germany? What was that aha moment?
Okay. Well, the problem is that, do you remember my mother died when I was in 1931, before Hitler came. And just so you know, my father was arrested in 1932, a year before Hitler. I'm sure you know, Hitler was not elected.
Right.
He was appointed. And so he was already in a concentration camp in 1932, before Hitler actually came into power, being that he was politically inclined against what was not Nazism.
So because really he was put in a prison because he was a socialist.
Yeah.
Not so much because he
and
was
a Jew.
And a Jew.
We're both together. But
Was he a communist or was he a socialist?
Socialist.
Did the Germans make a distinction in their mind between socialism and
As I recall, I didn't live at home, so I really don't know the difference.
yeah?
Because I lived in the orphanage at that time.
So, time period wise, again, maybe you could give us through a little bit of a chronology of what happened, 1932 and so on, that ultimately you ended up going to France.
Well, okay. I went first into the orphanage, which was in 1931 when my mother died. And I stayed there until 1939 when, they had the big pogrom when they burned all the synagogues and all that. That's when the surrounding countries started to take in people, children up to the ages of 14. And I just got in under the deadline. I was almost 14, but so my father had remarried to a Jewish woman, and they decided to send me off to Kindertransport and make it a final say goodbye, knowing that would possibly never see me in my lifetime.
Could you explain that scene, where they're sending you off, leaving your native Germany, this is your country you were born in, and again, possibly not seeing you again. What was that like?
A lot of wet handkerchiefs. You say goodbye to your parents, and which made it extremely difficult, of course, because you never know where you would arrive to the people like you. We had some people come, once we came to France, they were not people that used to come from Russia way back in the 1918s, and they were not too friendly towards us. And we were also treated in France as foreigners. And we were 40 kids living there at the time.
Did you have any siblings that went with you?
No. My mother couldn't. I'm an accident.
Okay.
And no, I'm serious, because the doctor told my mother, don't ever have children. That's why she died at the age of 31. So.
Gotcha. So you're a only child. How did your dad explain what was going on, or how did you observe what was going on in 1939 that sort of triggered this? Yeah.
Basically, I just saw him on Sundays between 9 and 5.
Okay.
For my whole youth, was starting at the age of 6 to 14. And the only thing I can remember, he always told me, when you go back to the orphanage on Sunday nights, be careful you don't get hurt on the way. So look around who's trying to beat you up or something like that. So.
Were you aware in the orphanage in 1938, a year earlier with Kristallnacht, all of that, being in Berlin, how did that impact you?
Well, according to the picture there, in 1938, when the night that all the synagogues were burned, but I don't know if you're aware of it, they only torched the synagogues if no Gentile people lived next door. Because if there were Gentile people living next door, they would be affected by the traveling fire. So they only destroyed those synagogues. But we stayed in our synagogue, in our building. The thing that we lived on a U-shaped building complex. And the next morning when we woke up, we looked up on one of the roofs of the circle there, that there was 3 policemen standing with guns in their hands and guarding us kids playing soccer in the backyard. So, but we were about 100 kids there. So.
When you went back to the schools the next few days, how did they explain that to you at in the schools?
I don't know if I can't recall any explanation, but for us because we suddenly, since they transferred us to all Jewish schools, we had to walk 40 minutes to go walk to school and walk back after hours. And when you pass a synagogue, which had all of its contents thrown out on the street, and people were stepping on it, and it was more time for us to walk across all this destruction and get on school without getting hurt in the process.
What were your thoughts when you saw that, when you saw all the Jewish religious items on it?
Very, very disturbing. But on the other hand, you had to make sure you don't get hurt in the process, that somebody else would beat you up for it or some other kid.
And how old were you at that time, sir?
It was in 1938. I was 13 years old.
So then, the next year, you are sent off, and your dad says, "Remember, you are a German, act accordingly," as you were leaving to go off to France.
Yeah.
What do you think, what did he mean by that?
Just to be obedient, don't make any trouble, and don't get involved in any fights.
Yeah.
So
where were you headed to in France? Did they tell you? Did you?
we first went into a home about 40 miles out of Paris, which was owned by a... Okay, we couldn't get it. You saw the picture of it in my room. We couldn't go and move into the castle that was reserved for the kids because it was being occupied by Russian girls from the Russian Revolution. And when they graduated and left, then it was occupied by girls coming from the Spanish Revolution. Remember at the time Franco came into power, he knocked out and when they left, we moved into the castle, but we lived in another building first.
Now those girls would have been fascist or they would have been communist?
From Spain, I couldn't tell you.
So they got caught up in
all we know, we played basketball.
Good for you.
We didn't go into political backgrounds. So.
Well, likewise, they didn't go into your political background either. So.
No. Well, they knew we were refugees from down the street, from Germany, and they're from Spain, but not the background.
You actually got exposed to a little bit of an air raid, didn't you? Was it Quincy? Yeah.
It was in Quincy when we lived in this first home before going into the castle. You're going to laugh now.
Yeah.
They told us the German government, or the French government, said that an announcer with 2 drums on the horse into town, and they tell you if the siren goes on once, something, second siren, or third siren, then you go in the basement. And there we were 40 kids in one building, and the sirens went off in the early part of the war. The kids were all running in the basement, and they all yelled at me, Stephen. They called me Stephen because the name Heinz is very German, and also in the orphanage in Germany there were 5 other guys with the name of Heinz. So I adopted it. Well, my Stephen is my middle name, so I've been used that. But anyway, so the kids were all running into the basement. I was laying in bed. The sirens were going. The bombs were falling. But I said, the guy said, go into the basement on the 3rd blow of the siren. So I waited for the 3rd blow. I could have been half dead half the time.
Well, there you go.
You know, you give me instructions. In the orphanage, they told me follow instructions.
Yeah,
which I did.
Your dad said that. You know,
I did. So.
Oh, that's great. You actually find yourself in Paris at some point, don't you?
In Paris?
Yeah.
That's after we left the home. It was the war had the invasion had taken place, and they moved us out of occupied France into unoccupied France. So we had to leave the home where the castle was. I'm sorry. The reason we had to leave the building because when we came back we escaped from the Germans, and we came back, and we told the Germans this is our building. So, thinking back, the German officer had a choice: put them on a freight car and ship them off to a camp. 40 kids, Jewish kids, perfect. And but he said, you can stay here and do duties for us, polishing their guns, feeding their horses, do laundry and stuff like that. So that sort of saved our lives, having to go to a camp. 3 kids later on went to a camp and never came out. 3 of our 40 kids.
Did you keep track of those 40 kids?
Up to a point until they came into camp. Then I knew pretty much where all the 40 kids were, but that gradually dispersed as time progressed.
Yeah.
So some of them joined the French underground as we got older, and so it was.
Take us through now the next steps in your life. You have that experience, and then what happens next?
While we were living in Paris, in occupied Paris with the Germans, and you may be interested to know that I used to wear my leather pants. You know the German leather pants?
Yeah.
And they got them German guards. Every time they looked at me, I said, there's one we have to get, but they never did. So I was very lucky. I was stupid enough to wear these pants periodically.
Did you wear a uniform? Did you have to wear? Did you wear the star? Was there anything?
No, we left before that became law.
Okay.
That you had to identification.
Right.
So
they would have no way to really know that you were Jewish.
No, because I was living in France.
Yeah.
You see.
What was life like
And also living in Paris, just on the outskirts of Paris, don't ever serve me black olives. For 6 months we had a barrel of black olives standing in the hallway, and we used to take them out and substitute our meals.
Oh gosh. Black olives.
So if you serve me martini, it's always it should be a green olive, never a black one.
Well, that's a good thing to know. Maybe that's the title of your article. No black olives. So I'm just curious about Paris occupation. How did the Germans treat the Parisians? I mean, was there a kind of peaceful coexistence?
Controlled.
Control?
Yeah, they told you who's entitled to buy first and second class tickets on subways versus a third class for the general public. So that was very strictly enforced.
So what was the precipitating event that sort of led you to leave France? I mean, what happened?
Well, I had to, first of all, us 40 kids were transferred to unoccupied France, to another home. And this may interest you. There's a teacher we had, and what he did before he came to see us, he was with kids in southern France near Switzerland. And he died about 6 months ago. And in the obituary, they told the story when he played baseball with those kids. That was near the French border. And he took a ball as the outside guard, throw it to the pitcher to make his pitching. He threw the ball into Switzerland. And he always knew 3 kids were designated to escape, to catch that ball that went into Switzerland and never come back.
My golly.
So this way he got them transferred to Switzerland. And then he came to us in unoccupied France when we got there. He used to wake us up, I would say 10 minutes after midnight practically. It seemed that way, but it was very early in the morning. And he said, put on your shorts and a t-shirt and go outside and run. Oh, about 20 below zero or something like that. And we found out later on when we got older, he spoke to us and the war was over. And he said, the reason I had you go out and run in the cold weather, practically undressed, because someday you have to run for your life. And this way you will learn how to do it. So we went to unoccupied France, and I know you didn't see it, but I'm a certified leather worker on top of it. So I can make pocket books and stuff like that, because there was no room for me at age 15 to be in a classroom. Because the French schools were, farm town schools, one school class for the whole population.
This fellow who had you go out and run every morning, was he Jewish background?
Oh yeah, he's a Holocaust, a camp survivor. He got out at that time, so.
Let me get back to this baseball story. So this guy, they're playing baseball, and he throws a ball.
Well, like the coach will throw a ball to the pitcher.
Yeah.
So why did he throw it? But he missed. He threw it into Switzerland.
And so these 3 guys go after it.
Yeah.
And just
pretend to take the ball, or whether they picked it up or not, I don't know. But they didn't turn around. They continued on. They apparently knew where the closest point is to get into a home.
I'm a baseball fan. That's a great story. How to escape using baseball.
So.
Wow. Anyways, so you do at some point, there's a trigger mechanism for you to be invited to go to America. How did that happen?
Well, we went to unoccupied France, and we lived there, and we were The Germans didn't occupy unoccupied France. They watched it. So when the Germans came across the border for their periodic inspection, the townspeople used to go, and no telephones in those days. The townspeople used to go from door to door and say, the Germans are coming. So we knew they were coming to our home to see if any one of us had matured enough to go to a work camp in Germany. So what we did, we all had a hiding place in the woods. I had a hole in the ground with a piece of plywood on top and grass and all that. And we used to hide in there until the Germans came, inspected. All they saw was the little kids. So they went back into Germany, and we came out of our hiding places. And in that home, I wrote a letter to the American Red Cross. I'm sorry, to the Red Cross in Switzerland, I should say. And I told them, please find my parents anywhere in this world. Because remember, we got separated, not knowing where we would go. And they found them in Haverhill, Massachusetts, which is an outskirt of Boston. And so we made contact, and my parents, who were, at that time, they were housekeepers. My father was a chauffeur, my mother was a housekeeper. Even though in Germany they had a housekeeper and everything else, but there was no choice. So they got an affidavit ready. My mother's boss, who's a former refugee from Russia, he signed an affidavit, and my mother's first cousin, who lived in Haverhill, Massachusetts. So I had 3 affidavits, and it took me 2 years to get a visa to come to this country. And once I had my visa, I went to the consulate, and I said I'm supposed to get a visa. He said, show me your passport. I said, why from Germany? He said, I'm no longer a German citizen. German took away my citizenship. So I came to France. I had no French or German visa. So he created a certificate for me to come to this country, which had a stamp on it, official person to come here, which I did. I met my parents in 1942 when I came to this country. Yeah. And my father kissed me and took me to a clothing store, because I was wearing a suit which was made partially of sawdust and other wood items, which can be very painful in spots.
Yeah. I can only imagine.
So
what was the German word for that type of clothing?
it was just a regular suit, but the mixture of it, so they put sawdust into it, or wood chips, and so anyway, he got me a new suit. Then we drove to Boston, and I took English classes at the high school in after hours at night.
And how old would you have been at that time?
I was 17 when I came here. And my mother and father were housekeepers. So the guy they worked for, he was a controller of a mining company on the East Coast. How the hell they make a mining company on the East Coast? They haven't seen a mine in 40 years or whatever. So, but anyway, he gave me a job as an office boy, which was challenging. Did you ever start a job and you didn't know the language, and your boss talks to you and I didn't pay any attention because I didn't know he was talking to me? So and then when I turned 18, I went to the draft board, because the law says when you're 18 you register for the service, which I did, and I lived in a neighborhood which was all young people had been drafted. So 6 months later, I was actually put into service and sent to Camp Grant, Illinois. Now, the Camp Grant, which was very unexciting, the basic training. But remember, I was still a foreigner. So years later, I said to myself, how come the Army sent me with knowing German and French fluently, learning English? Why did they send me to the medical corps to count bandages? So I can only think, and that's my own thought. Don't quote me anywhere else, but it's my own thought. I said to myself in later years, you know, the reason they didn't put me into the infantry or something like that, it must be the reason that they figured, since I'm not a citizen, if you give me a gun, who would I shoot first? A German or an English or an American? I mean, that's my own thinking.
That's working on the belief that the U.S. Army is logical.
Huh?
That's working on the belief that everything in the U.S. Army is logical. Having been in the Army as you have, I don't know about that one.
But anyway, and then they sent me off to Camp Ritchie, which was when we finished basic training, and they said you'll be transferred to a very secret place. And you know, at every railroad station, they said you were next railroad station. We got there. It was a military intelligence training center. And then you go into a camp and all you hear is people speaking with an accent.
We're going to Camp Ritchie, for the camera. I've heard about the Ritchie boys.
Yeah.
Just general. What was the program? What was the idea at Camp Ritchie?
It is to teach us with our language specialty to become interpreters of documents, translators of documents, and interrogators of German soldiers. And here's how they did it. Mm-hmm. For instance, at nighttime, while we were sleeping, suddenly you wake up and all you hear is machine guns going in the distance. The next morning there was a test on your desk which says, which machine guns did you hear last night?
Oh my gosh.
German, Italian, or in some cases, Russian. Okay, now, German was logical. Italian, they had the fastest machine guns in the world at that point in time. And then why did they give you Russian things? Because on someday when we meet the Russians, and we suddenly hear the Russian machine guns, we would be very careful not to start a war with a friendly country. Mm. So that's one test they gave us. When they gave us a month or periodic test, I don't know if it was monthly or not, but periodic test, they gave us a compass reading. And they said, go on a compass a certain distance, and you come to a tent. You're going to pass a physical, a test, and then you get a bite to eat, sleep for a couple of hours, and go off to your next location. But as you traveled on your compass cross country, you had troops shooting at you, blanks. Mm-hmm. But there was enough light that you could see, and we had to identify those people or those soldiers, whether they were Italian or Germans, and we were being attacked. So we had to, that's part of our test. And then also, on Saturday nights, we used to go to Hagerstown, Maryland, near the Blue Mountains. You know, you go out for a glass of beer, you know, when the time is for you to enjoy. Well, the people in town used to run to the police station, the civilians. They said, we're being invaded. And they were calmed down. Well, what they did, they took soldiers that they captured in Africa. Do you remember when Eisenhower and Patton invaded Casablanca before the big invasion, and to knock the people out of what's the name of the town in Central Africa? God, I forgot about it. But anyway, so they took those prisoners and let them walk to the town of Hagerstown. But we had to identify them on their information on their left arm.
My golly.
Like we had our armored division and so on. And then they took the people from the Italian armies, because us refugees in Camp Ritchie, we used to have a book about the size of the book that you're holding, of every division in our Italian and German armies. The name of their captains, where they fought, their casualties they had. So if we get a prisoner from a certain division, we open up the book and we said, oh, how is General so-and-so doing? How many casualties did you have on the Eastern Front? So it was like our Bible. I didn't know what my next American division was next to me, but I knew all about the German division.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
so that's the way they tested us, and also with the compass and all that. So,
What did you feel like? I mean, here you were assigned to an area where you're going to use your German, you use your intelligence,
yeah.
and at the same time gathering information ultimately for the benefit of somebody against the Germans. I mean, against your native German. Do you have any sort of emotional reaction?
No. I had no German attachment.
Yeah.
So. And then one time, when we were ready to go from there to go overseas, and we all received our promotions, either staff sergeant or technical sergeant, we got on a British ship to take us overseas. And the British diet was no good. I mean, water-soaked bologna and warm beer for 7 days. Forget it. But one night we were there 6 days in Boston, in the harbor, waiting for the ship to leave. And then one day we couldn't leave and go into town, but they sent us all to a movie. So can you imagine a whole movie house full of soldiers? And they played a movie. We came out. Half the guys had tears in their eyes. Mind you, we were ready to go overseas. Why did we have tears in our eyes? We saw Lassie's Return.
Lassie's Return, yeah. Those were tough, man. I remember.
So all these soldiers are supposed to go overseas, we started crying. So
then you have. Did you know where you were going when you were off on a British ship heading towards?
Well, we suspected, being on a British ship, that we went to England. Mm-hmm. And we got to England, and the ship zigzagged all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. When we inquired about it, is a guy drunk or something like that? He said, no, we want to avoid a submarine catching us. So they tried to give us hope that we won't sink. So, but anyway, we landed in England, and they took us into downtown London, into a private residence section, because we were all sergeants or better of some sort. And that was the beginning of the V-bomb. Remember, that's a bomb that's loaded with explosives. And they always said, don't worry about the planes, they won't hurt you. But when the plane when you hear the engine stop on the plane, you know it's stopping and coming down wherever it's located. So we all prayed that there's enough gas to take you one village over.
This was the V1s or the V2s or?
I forgot which ones, but it was the beginning of the V-bomb.
And so what time period would you have been when you got over to Europe? This would have been 1944.
That was before the invasion.
Okay, before the invasion.
Yeah. And from there, when we got off the boat and we were all quartered in, they then assigned us to the division. My 6th Armored Division was already located in England, and they took us over there and assigned us, and we got integrated. Never fully accepted, though.
Is that right?
We were all, how do you expect an American soldier to find 6 or 10 people assigned to your division and they all speak with an accent? No.
How did that manifest itself? Did they just let you sit separately? I mean, how did they make it difficult?
We were by ourselves. So, and we were never invited for 25 years to join their annual union. Because us foreigners were attached to the division. We were not integrated into the division.
So you're there at England prior to D-Day.
Yeah.
What did you know? I mean, most people didn't know anything about it, but what was the build-up? Did you get a sense that something was happening?
Well, the first thing that was happening that we found out about it, and was confirmed later on, that Hitler got defeated by General Patton and Eisenhower in the North Africa invasion. And in general, they got, oh God, what was his name? Rommel. And Rommel was assigned to the west coast of France.
Right, the West Wall.
Yeah, and he was waiting. He said to himself, "Where is Eisenhower? And where's Patton?
Yes, right.
Where's Patton?"
Right.
So what the American Army did, which I think is general knowledge, they built tank divisions out of cardboard.
Right.
And they'll put them along the English border. So when the German intelligence saw all these cardboard things, they said, oh, now Patton is there.
Yeah.
He wasn't.
Right.
Because suddenly we got orders on our division, take off your emblems, take off your armored division signs of your vehicles. We don't want anybody to know that there is an armored division in England waiting for the invasion. So we crossed the ocean, or the channel, I should say. We crossed the channel as an unknown division, and we landed in France until one day, shortly afterwards, they said, put back your insignias and go to war, and Germany knew that Patton was in business. So.
That's amazing. So you're part of the, shortly after the D-Day, you land in Normandy.
Yeah. I think it was about within 30 days we landed.
And what was your assignment as far as being part of the 6th? What would they have you do? What was...
Primarily interrogation of prisoners, translation of documents, or into a special situation when they occupied a certain location, to go into a house to search it, to see if there was a German headquarters there, and they left documents behind that we could catch and translate for them.
Where did it go from there? So you get this intelligence.
Yeah.
Where did that intelligence go?
More 90% of my intelligence went to my intelligence, the G2 of our division. The G2 is your intelligence officer. And what he did, I don't know exactly what, but what I did when we landed across and we started to advance from the Brittany Peninsula and so on, I also kept in our headquarters different maps. And in the evening hours, you know, when they make announcements to the public, I used to listen to the war results as the Germans reported it, or the English reported it, and so on, and I posted that on the map. So my general always knew what the rest of the world was thinking of our advances.
And who was your general?
Our general his name was Grow, G-R-O-W, under General Patton. And,
I read in here briefly a baseball story about you interrogating somebody about Ted Williams. You know, the story about Ted Williams, was there a question about Ted Williams, the baseball player?
yeah,
How did I remember that?
that doesn't ring a bell with me.
I'll find. We'll keep going here, and I'll find it.
Okay.
Because you caught my attention.
Look at the index. Look on the Ted Williams.
Yeah, something to do with Ted Williams. You're somebody who's trying to be an American. You know, there was.
Yeah.
And you asked about Ted Williams. He's a great baseball player.
Yeah.
He's a great first baseman. You know, and he got caught because
Yeah.
he wasn't a first baseman. He was.
Oh.
He was an outfielder, and so that was one of these trick questions. So.
Well, the only thing is too that the Americans in our division, when they called a person, especially a German prisoner, and they said, that's what it reminded me of, they always said, you know, oh, we used to travel by jeep, they used to stop us, and then they saw a dog tags, and my dog tags, it says Stephan Lewy on it, and my religion I changed to O, which was you had no religion. But then anybody with the name Lewy, which is a name out of the Torah, you know, it's black and white, so I mean, it's automatic. But what the American guards did many times, they used to stop us when we were in our jeeps, and they asked us, you know, who are you, you know, and I said, see here, we're Americans, doctor, and so on. And then they said us, you know, who won the last World Series or something like that. So just to catch you, you know, half the time we didn't know. So what?
Well, there's a famous movie scene about exactly that. You know, I forget whether it's whatever it is. They ask about the Dodgers and the Yankees, and all of that stuff. But exactly what you just said.
Yeah, but also, if you ever have a chance to see a film called The Ritchie Boys, and then since you're in this field, I suggest you buy it and for your own purpose. And there were two Ritchie boys in a division like our division who went to Corps headquarters, and that's right in that movie. And they went to Corps headquarters and told them, across from us at the front line was at the Battle of the Bulge. He said there's a fantastic accumulation of the German army. And he said, oh, we got to walk up or get to Corps headquarters and tell them about this big accumulation of German armies. And the Corps headquarters says, oh, don't worry about it. They're the ones that did the invasion to put the 82nd Airborne in trouble.
As you're moving your way through Normandy, landing Normandy, and where does your path take you next? Kind of pick up the story, where do you, where's your next, as you travel through France and ultimately into Germany?
Yeah. Well, we stopped first in Aschaffenburg, and a town which had not really been bombed very badly. But we had our holiday Yom Kippur, and Patton gave us 3 hours off.
There you go.
So, but there was no temple in town, no rabbi in town. So what we did, we took a bombed-out church, covered all the statues that were left with white sheets, and have a priest say our prayers for us on Yom Kippur.
Yeah.
And so then we did some occupation duty too at the end, which but I was very careful. I did not get back to Berlin, because I figured if I get to Berlin, the Russians will never let me out.
No.
So I don't know what happened or anything like that. And I did go back in later years, but so.
Tell us about the liberation of Buchenwald.
Very painful. We had one fellow I met who was in a division next to us, who came to Buchenwald, and he assembled the prisoners, a Jewish fellow, and he told them who we are and so on, because we found a certain amount of reluctance of the people who were enslaved there to be friendly towards us. And we talked about it, and the reason we felt is that the Germans were occupied by people the Jews were occupied by the German army in gray uniforms. Now you got people in khaki uniforms, and why should they act any differently? And they were very unfriendly, until the guy said, he almost was in tears. He went back in and he assembled the people, and he started talking to them in Yiddish. And he said, we had 1 million friends all of a sudden, because they knew what was going on. But before that, they really didn't.
Yeah, they were conditioned.
It wasn't made any difference to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, but the camp itself, we hired, we commandeered German residents living by, from near the front door of the camp, to come and bury the dead. Oh, I never saw that. I never knew what was going on. You know, a bunch of angels. So.
Despite the human smoke. Despite the human smoke.
I'm reading from your book here. When I came across piles of human remains lying outside of the ovens filled with scorched human bones, my rage knew no limits. My muscles tensed, and if someone touched me, I probably would have cracked like a china teacup. I swear if I saw a Nazi in front of me right now, I would have killed him with my bare hands. Is it hard to even listen to that, what you've written today?
Oh yeah. I know I've felt very, very aggravated, especially finally learning that my father was in a concentration camp. And that to me never really did. And the beatings I got from the Nazi kids after school. So it stays with me. I mean, fortunately I can put everything that happened in my life into compartments. Some people are differently. They can't. Well, I had one refugee group that I visited on Sundays. They never accepted wives, just survivors. And I could not sit and talk to them. I spoke to them once. I said, what you need a psychiatrist. You don't need me to help you. Because these people came home every Sunday, and even though they lived in this country, all had jobs, they still could not accept the fact that they are living in freedom. So that made it very, and that to me it isn't.
These were refugees from what country?
Either Poland or Germany. So, and I tell you what, I was periodically very unfriendly to prisoners. I never hurt anybody or banged anybody up, but I threatened them with many times to get my information especially if they told me, rank, name, and serial number. Why do I have to give you any more?
I'm told on occasion the prisoners were told that a Soviet officer was visiting and looking for people to talk to, and that could be arranged rather quickly that afternoon unless the person became cooperative. And suddenly that seemed to open up the doors.
Yeah. Well, if you read the book that you have, that's the thick one. There's one story in there that I'm not proud of. But I took a prisoner, and it was an SS trooper, you know what it's called. And then he gave me his rank, name, and serial number. So I gave him 2 pieces of wood. I said, nail it together and put your name and number on it. And then he still wouldn't talk. And I said, well, dig a hole, and lay down, make sure it fits. He talked. So I would have never done anything to shoot him or anything, but I used it as a means of getting even.
It proved fairly effective.
And then also, when we did occupation duty, the General Eisenhower ordered everybody from block leader in the Nazi party should be arrested. And in Germany, you moved. After the mover left, the first trip you took is go to the police station and register. My name is John Doe and I'm moving in at a certain address. So I went to the police station. I got 50 folders. I took a 2.5-ton truck at 7 o'clock at night, like they arrested my father. And I got myself the biggest MP guy I could find. And we went with a truck from door to door. We knocked on the door. The little bag was standing right there with their toilet articles. And we arrested him. And I tell you what, for me to have the driver take that truck with 50 refugees was a pleasure in the middle of the night. So.
Wow. I'm reading just a portion, again, of your book, Past is Always Present, where you're at Buchenwald. This sort of ties into Nuremberg. A sign pointed toward the SS office. We investigated thinking it might be a lab. The officer recognized pieces of tattooed skin that must have been taken from prisoners. We saw the lampshade and made from human skin standing next to a couple of shrunken heads. He turned away from us and retched. We were emotionally affected. That evidence that became part of the Nuremberg trial. Very famous part of that, of Justice Jackson.
Yeah.
And I think it came from Buchenwald. So that was you, and it was, in a way, what you gathered there. And I can't imagine the emotions that you felt at that moment.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely, you had these things. Like I was walking the streets doing I did a short period of occupation. A woman was on the street, and I forgot the town where we were doing occupation, and she screamed. And I walked over, I said, "What's the problem?" He said, that man over there is a doctor that did experiments on me in a concentration camp. And so we found out the name, went to visit him, he wasn't home, and his wife says, I don't know my husband, where he is or anything like that. But I had an MP guy with me. And I said, let's take our pistols and put them on the table. And she talked. And we caught him that way, so.
I find remarkable what you just said a few minutes ago, how you're psychologically able to put things in compartments.
Yeah.
Were you always able to do that? And that's, I mean, it's a tremendous technique, but.
Yeah. Well, I think that goes back to my profession.
Yeah.
I started off as an accountant.
Okay, yeah.
So you had compartments, you had the divisions.
Debits, credits, all that, yeah.
So, and as a child, having lived in an institution ever since the age of 6, until I was 18, there was, I knew exactly what to do with certain things and so on. It's a very structured life I led. Because in the orphanage, you do as you're told, you eat what you're supposed to eat. And, well, I shouldn't say it, there was one exception. Once a week we had herring for dinner. And we hated all of it. So we wrapped it up in paper and threw it on the upright piano on our way out. But otherwise it was a very structured life.
I'm Swedish, and we have herring, and I would do the same thing. Put it on the piano. When, at some point, you get enough points to actually leave the service.
Yeah.
And come back, and you have this reunion with your dad and stepmom.
My father had died, by the way.
Oh, okay, I didn't.
And they wouldn't, the family wouldn't. I was under the army laws. It says if you're overseas and you have a death in the family, you can come back for 3 weeks. So when I got a letter one day that my father had passed away. He had a heart attack and he was in a coma. So had I come back, I couldn't have talked to him anyway. So the family decided and told my second mother that don't bring him back, because if you do, once he gets back, they're going to send him to Japan afterwards.
You've spoken quite a bit. That was one of your gifts and missions, is that you've talked to students.
Yeah.
As you give that message, what is the principal points you want to make sure students understand? You lived it.
Yeah.
You're survivor, your dad was a survivor of a concentration camp. You saw the most horrific things. How best to convey that information to somebody who didn't do that and to make a difference today? I mean,
the things I bring out most directly is enjoy the life that you have, make the best of it, but look what can happen if it's out of your control. And that's basically what it is. To leave home at the age of 6, and mother and father, I don't know what they are. The schooling, you get kicked out of school because you are in a different religion, and that's the main thing to kids today. Every kid has a different church they go to and so on. So that's what I bring out, things, and the beatings you get for religious reasons. So.
You're 95 years old. You're fantastic.
94.
94.
Don't push it.
I'm confident you'll be 95 soon.
Yeah.
As you look today and you kind of look surround you and issues that you're reading today in Europe and other locations about anti-Semitism, does that discourage you?
It disturbs me a great deal, what goes on, and the reasons for it. And because it goes back to they knock the minority groups. That. And politically, I'm very, very disturbed what goes on. So.
How about a humorous incident that happened when you were in the Army? Can you describe one funny incident that happened while you were in the Army?
Anything unusual, anything you'd say, hey, Greg and Phil, you're not going to believe this happened while we were going through France, and something,
Yeah.
the ordinary.
I tell you what, I called an American soldier and had him arrested and put in the prisoner of war cage. We were going across Germany and they gave us a morning off, big vacation, and most of us went to a little coffee shop in town have a fresh egg, which we hadn't had, something like that, a cup of coffee. And I looked at my captain and I said, you see that soldier sitting over there? Call the police, an MP guy, and have him arrested. An American soldier. He looked at me, who the hell are you to tell me that? An American soldier, put him in a camp. How did I find out about it? Because he was eating his eggs with a knife and fork. See, like all of us do, we take the knife, we put it down, put the fork in the other hand and eat it. And sure enough, he was a German soldier who spoke English, got an American uniform, and was mingling among us. So that's my accomplishment. I didn't get a medal for it, but
That's a great story.
Tell us about George Patton, too. Tell us about your thoughts about George Patton.
George Patton was a very stern general, very determined to do things, but always, because the few meetings I was participating in, that you could always have the feeling, give me the amount of casualties we're going to have so I can pick the lowest one on the piece of paper. And that impressed me the most of him, besides his polished shoes and mud this deep. So, but
We all have a lot.
but the thing is, you never unpacked with him.
I wish I'd
Just
never
a
gone on
minute.
that one.
Sure, when we liberated Buchenwald, he said, let's get out of here and let's go to Moscow. We were lucky we reached the Russians, right? But he was trying to go to Moscow, and Eisenhower finally toned him down.
Can you describe him? You did have a little eye contact with General Patton. Tall, size, what was he like when you...
I would say he's smaller than you are. I would say just a little bit shorter than I am. But
I heard he had a very squeaky voice.
yeah. And he was living in a 2.5-ton truck, so that means he was always in motion. You never know when he came.
Did he have the silver helmet? Did he have the...
Oh, the unpolished shoes and everything. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, the pistol?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You're unbelievable. You're just an unbelievable individual, man, on so many fronts.
So,
Just as an aside, because through the Jackson Center, we've had the privilege of interviewing folks who were German natives who had come over to the United States, similar path
yeah.
to yours, who subsequently were, I don't know if they were Ritchie boys, but they went back to Nuremberg and were then interpreters and translators
That's it,
for
yeah.
Justice Jackson.
Yeah.
And so they tell stories of meeting Goering and
Yeah.
Hess and just their reaction. And they, like you, frankly, could compartmentalize, even though their families had been liquidated during the concentration camps, but to be in the same room like this with Hermann Goering and actually be a civil.
Yeah. I have a feeling that most of those Germans that they used for the trials were people who were probably not have the frontline duty that I did. Yeah, so
Sure.
they were part of the Eisenhower headquarters.
Correct.
So
They ultimately ended up in the OSS
Yeah,
in,
yeah,
with
so.
Wild Bill Donovan.
yeah,
Speaking of Nuremberg, I saw the picture of Nuremberg. You were assigned, or you went there for a day, didn't you?
yeah.
Was the trial on at that time?
No.
No.
It was not the end of the war. No.
Did you go out? I saw the picture. You went out to Zeppelin Field or the stadium.
Yeah. So it was a very, let's say, interesting trip. I'd never been there
Yeah.
because all I ever was in Berlin. So,
Were you ever approached after the war to serve in the OSS or anything of that nature? No.
no, I came home and I was assigned back to my division was eliminated, and they shipped us back to the United States for a 3-week furlough, and then we would have probably gone to the Pacific. But the war ended, the atomic bomb dropped, and we were finished. So.
Have you ever reflected on why you survived and others didn't? Have you ever thought about that?
No.
Probably not good to think about that.
I would say that there was always luck in my
Luck of the draw.
activities. I got too many times too close to that something could have happened, and it didn't, so I didn't. Because there was always something else to be concerned about, what's the next step, and,
What's the question we haven't asked you? What's the when you get interviewed? You've been interviewed quite a bit before. That people normally are curious about you and your career.
Because it doesn't. I venture to say it's the not having been exposed to the same kind of life. Separation from your parents, father in a camp, mother dying at the age of 6. And then I went back in '96, for instance, to take my family, my 2 kids, to Germany, to show them where I was born and so on. It worked out very well, but I wanted to visit my deceased mother's cemetery. And suddenly I found out that in Germany, in the non-Jewish community, you only own your grave for 20 or 25 years. And then they contact you and you have to repurchase it. If you don't repurchase it, they will turn it over and put another body into it. But when I came and asked for my mother, I knew my mother's location, because I was a 6-year-old child, but I still remember the funeral. So, and where she was buried, and I told the tour guide, who came from East Germany, who didn't like Jewish people to begin with, and I remember that distinctly. But and I asked him about it. He said, "Oh, they moved that cemetery." I said, "Did they contact my mother's 2 brothers, who were Germans, to see if they're willing to pay for it and have it transferred to another location?" He said, "No." So I said, "What happens to if nobody is in a family there?" And I was living United States. He didn't know where I was. And he said, I said, so what happens to if nobody was there to repurchase or relocate that grave? He said, no, they just turn over the land. So I found out where my mother's grave was. It became the entrance to the old Tempelhof Airport.
Oh my gosh.
So when I took my kids in 1996, I took them to Berlin in an airplane which landed in Tempelhof. And I knew at some point when it would land, that's probably where my mother's grave was.
Talking about making contact with your mother.
Wow.
So I never had a chance to visit her grave if I wanted to. Or if I had known, I would have paid for the transfer or something like that.
Do you think they really did transfer them, or do you think they just kind of...
No, they transferred them, the people that they paid for it.
Paid for
Yeah,
others?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. No,
Oh dear.
no.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
So,
Thank you, sir. What do you attribute your joy of life to? I mean, you've got a joy of life, a presence that a lot of people your age don't have. What do you attribute that to?
well, first of all, I try to maintain an independent life. My kids would love me to move in with them. I'm not in favor of it. I don't belong there. You know, I'd rather see them every week, every now and then. And I do what I feel like doing. Like, for instance, I've spoken to what I think over close to 1,000 kids in schools and so on. And one of them called me last night. She said, I liked your story so much, I turned it into a contest. And I won a prize. Give me your email address so I can send you.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So in that respect, and I think telling my story, I don't make a structured speech out of it. You know, I get involved in little odds and ends, and